Hello everyone, I am Adriano Ercolani for Cinema Daily US. I'm here with Bryn Chainey, the director of rabbittrap. Um, my first question is about, I think that you have a background as a folklorist, and this is a movie that has a lot to do with folklore. So when and how did you feel the chance, the instinct in order to convey your background in a feature film?
Um, I mean, the very first things I read as a kid were folklore and fairy tales. I mean, they're the books that I was very first read as a child. It's like the native language kind of that I learned first. I was born to an English mother and a Welsh father, and it was important for my dad to teach us about the Celtic side of our family, and so from a very young age, we were taught that there might actually be fairies in the woods in Wales. There might actually be beings out there, and nature is possibly inhabited by more than the creatures that we recognize. They may be are just beyond the veil. And it was just a side of life that I always treated as a possibility. Maybe not necessarily believing in it, but always being very interested in it. And so when I came to writing movies, even as a young man, it just felt like a natural path in. Although I love horror films and fantasy films and sci-fi films, movies that play with genre, um, my real love is storytelling that integrates the psychological with the natural world, where there is a bit of an interplay between nature and this kind of nature. And that's what I love about folklore and fairy tales and myth is I think they speak to that relationship between the natural world and the internal world.
Watching the movie, actually, I thought that the settings of the woods, the soil, and the hills where the movie set as are basically another character in Rabbit Trap, as important as the actor. So, can you talk about the research in order to find the right settings in order to set your story?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, it's a mixture of practical and creative decisions to end up in any location. It was important that we shot everything on location. Nothing is a set, like nothing is in a studio. Um, the original plan was to make the whole film in Wales because it's set there and it's so grounded in Welsh folklore that it felt right to shoot there. And so the very first location scouting trip was just me and my cinematographer, who's from Norway. He's from a town called Bergen, which is the rainiest city in Norway, and it's very like Wales. The climate is very similar, and he actually grew up reading about Wales and always wanting to go. So this movie was his first chance. He flew over. I picked him up in my car. We got in my little. It's like a little mini. We got in my little mini, and we drove into Wales, and we searched many forests and looking for the right house that was isolated enough but also had access. And it was a really great way for him and I to get to know each other and talk about the film, and it was a fun trip. Um, and that was always the plan, shooting Wales. Over time, when we started doing the budget and the schedule and looking for crew, it became more and more difficult to shoot in Wales. Um, and it was eventually decided to shift the whole production to Yorkshire, which is in the more northern end of England,
Mhm.
because they have some crew hubs in Leeds and Manchester, which is a practical reason to go there. And Yorkshire just has the most amazing variety in landscapes. It had cave systems and pine forests and moors and these kind of oceans of rock, of limestone. And once we got up there and we started to drive around, it felt very right. But okay, this isn't Wales, but this feels like the Wales of the movie, at least. So anyone who's like from England and has done a lot of hiking will probably go, "That's not Wales." But beyond that, it's like the British Isles do have a certain similarity.
I tell you, I couldn't tell.
No, you wouldn't know.
I'm actually curious about why did you decide to set the movie in 1976? almost 50 years ago. Do you think that back in the day, because there were a stronger connection between human being and nature in some way? Do you think that nowadays society is more detached by nature because of technology or other issues?
I think, I mean, the characters are in their 30s in 1976, so I think they were probably, the characters would have been part of, at least adjacent to the kind of hippie movement. I think they would have been, those characters would have been connected to that a little bit. But the reasons were partly about the actual profession of the character. I really wanted Daphne to be a musician of a particular kind.
Mhm.
And that was someone who works with analog electronic music, because there's a difference between sample based electronic music and like analog electronic music, which is when you take an electrical current and you adjust the voltage to create a frequency and you create music. In a way, your instrument is electricity, and I thought this is an interesting setup for a horror film or for a magical film. What if the electricity that you're drawing up from the earth for your music, what if that ground is somehow haunted? What if the land that you're drawing the energy from has like fairy forces or things, you know? And so I wanted her to be that kind of musician, and a bunch of other reasons why. But so I wanted it to be set around that time, and for it not to be a choice. Like if the musician is playing with this kind of old gear, I didn't want it to be a nostalgic choice for her. I didn't want it to be, oh, I'm choosing to use electronic gear that's old. I wanted it to be, I wanted the character to be a pioneer of some kind, where she's right at the edge of what's possible. She's like scratching for new possibilities, and that meant setting it in a time where that was true. So it was mostly character based. It was a mixture of the sound technology I wanted and making sure that that was true for the character.
But following the characters, I love the fact that the three characters, in some scenes, they seem to belong to in the same world. They speak
Yeah.
the same language in some. In other scenes, they are kind of stranded. Especially Jade's character is creepy or funny. So I was wondering, how did you work in order with Dev, Rose, and Jade in order to develop this kind of difficult balance between the characters, also the different tone in their performances?
We didn't do all that much rehearsal. Rosie, Dev, and I met up for I think 4 days in a row before the shoot, and we went through the script together, and we just talked through the characters and what their relationship is like when we meet them on screen, and what their backstory might be, and we did some exercises to build kind of intimacy between them as characters and so on. And I remember Dev described the couple's situation as being he called it like an imperfect harmony, where they're working, but there's still something off. But they've let that offness exist. Um, and so I think that was just, it's baked into the script, and it was just part of the conversations we had very early. But there was still a bit of like uncertainty, like, well, how is this really going to play out in the moment? You know? And that's just, I don't know, they both went there. I don't know, it was really interesting to watch. I mean, we actually filmed quite a lot of their scenes separate first. And the very first scene that they had together was the bathtub scene. That's kind of it halfway through the movie. It's the most intimate, it's maybe the most emotionally kind of connected scene in the whole film, where Darcy and Daphne are in the bath, they're smoking a joint together, and they're talking about this new kid that's shown up. And there were little hints in that conversation about the tensions between them, but it's pretty harmonious. And that was the very first scene. And they're both pretty nervous about it. Like, oh God, are we going to find the connection? Is it going to be right? And I think it being a very intimate situation helped just make that connection, just formed it really quickly. I think their acting muscles just fired quickly.
Okay.
Then Jade is just a very special performer. She came in with a real intensity of how where the character was coming from. It was important that this child character wasn't just a creepy kid. It wasn't just a classic demon seed kind of trope that we've seen in movies. This needed to be a character that was coming from a place of longing and vulnerability, a hunger to be accepted. And Jade got that from the very beginning. Her first audition was really haunting to watch. Her eyes were just starving for love. And she's just really like, as a person, she's very like that grounded and fun and kind of matter of fact. But she can drop into this vulnerability so powerfully, you know? And it was quite disarming, I think, for Rosy and Dev. It was disorientating, I think, for them. Yeah. And it did take a bit of balance actually on set to find ways where the disorientation was just the right amount. And it was a bit of a kind of a negotiation, the first few scenes. But I was confident that in the edit it would work. I wanted the characters disoriented by this child. So I was comfortable with Rosy and Dev not being quite sure how to... Well, they were... Jade basically would take the rhythm of the scene and slow it right down. And that was quite disarming for the other actors. But I knew that was going to work.
You mentioned earlier on that there are some movies that in some way you watched when you were younger and created some kind of imagining in your mind. Honestly, I don't consider Rabbittrap a folk horror. I think it's more a folk tale, if you want to use a category. But there are any folk movies, let's call them this way, that actually inspired you, or you started thinking about when you started thinking about how to compose visually this movie?
Yeah, sure. There's a few. So in terms of it being a kind of a folk tale that weaves a bit of the supernatural, but without trying to be scary as the goal, because horror, I think, wants to horrify, whereas I think Rabbittrap, it wants to heal. I really wanted to make a movie that was a healing thing. So there's a British animation film called Watership Down, which is about a warren of rabbits who, after a vision that their warren is going to be destroyed, have to find a new home, and they go on this journey through the English countryside. And it's a very beautiful and haunting... I guess it's a children's film, but it disturbed a lot of children like me as a kid, because it's way too dark. But that was a real influence on the tone of the film. The Andrea Arnold's adaptation of Wuthering Heights from 2011 was a big reference for me in the tone of the film, the intensity of how nature interplays with emotions. So there were big influences. The work of Nick Rogue is a major influence to me, like Don't Look Now and Walkabout. Yeah, so those are some of them. And visually, we looked a lot to Tarkovsky. So our interiors were really... Our mood boards were lots of images from Mirror, in terms of how lighting was done and how you frame a character. And then our exteriors were a sort of a mixture of Stalker and the few exterior moments of Solaris at the beginning of the film. So, yeah, there were quite a few places we pulled from. And none of them were really strictly horror, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe Barbarian Sound Studio as a big reference. You see that one? It was a strict movie, yeah, about a Giallo set. I mean, that I think that was an early one I saw while I was writing, and it opened up. Okay. It helped me understand how I can begin to visualize the act of listening, sound. And I think that plays a small role in the influence of the film as well.
That's it. Okay, I think my time is up. Hey, Bryn, thank you very much for the interview, and congratulations on your first movie.
Thank you, Adriano. It was very nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right, take care.